Alright guys, so in this video we're going to cover the disassembly of the RK61 60% keyboard. We're going to start off with removing the keycaps and we're going to go all the way to desoldering the switches. First things first, you got to use a keycap puller to remove all the keycaps. Personally, I prefer to remove all the alphanumerical caps first and then the mods on the last row, leaving the spacebar for last. I just find that to be the easiest method to do it. Alright, so next I wanted to show you guys how thick these keycaps are using an actual caliper. And these are fairly common PPT keycaps. You can easily find them online. And they actually came with the board when I bought it off the previous owner. And I really liked them, so I kept them on the board. So these measure at 1.7 millimeters in thickness. This is fairly thick compared to most keycaps. Alright, so let's get to disassembling. The case actually has 4 screws on the back of it. You can use a Phillips head screwdriver to remove them. If you don't have one, you can also use a flathead screwdriver. You can get away with it, but just be careful not to damage the screws. Once you remove the screws, you can remove the back plate by pulling it up. So flip the keyboard over and you can actually pull on a switch gently to get the back plate moving. Now after you've done this, you got to make sure that you disconnect the PCB from the battery, because sometimes you can rip the wires apart. Alright, so having done this, next comes the fun part, desoldering all the switches. I have the soldering pen here set to 300 degrees Celsius, and you can even go to 350 if you prefer. It's just as safe. The trick here is to keep the tip of the pen on the solder for a few seconds until the solder is thoroughly melted. Then put the pump right on it and release the pump. Don't be scared to burn the pump, it's meant to handle that kind of heat. It might discolor over time, but it'll still work just fine. The other thing you want to remember is that you need to clean the pump every once in a while as you're desoldering, and that's because solder will get stuck in it. I know these pumps are supposed to be self-cleaning, but still some solder will get stuck inside it, affecting the way that it works. Another trick you can use if you don't manage to pull all the solder off is to put more solder on it and then desolder it again. So you can use a wick, but in case you don't have one, this method works just as well. The whole idea here is that when you have a tiny bit of solder left, it's hard to heat it up. So by putting more solder on, especially good solder, the heat will transfer easier to the whole thing, and then it's easier to desolder all the solder that's on it. Last thing, you got to use a switch puller to get all the switches out. And by this point, there should be no real force required from you to get them out. Just squeeze the sides of it with a switch puller and just gently pull them up. If you find that you have to use force, you probably left a little bit of solder on the leads. So that's it. The whole board is disassembled, all the switches are desoldered, and we're ready to put new switches in it.